Welcome in, listener. You're listening to a segment from the Slumpbuster podcast with Ju-Ju and Dre. Find the full episode on Spotify, iTunes, the Google Play Store, or our YouTube channel. Enjoy.
This is a story that just keeps on giving, man. I thought that we were already coming towards the end of it when we saw the punishments were listed out there, that everyone that had been fired that needed to go was gone. We did have our questions. What was going to happen to the players? Would there be any more punishment for Alex Cora? But then Scorched Earth just happened this week because we have 3 managerial openings now because we knew that A.J. Hinch had been fired from the Houston Astros. We knew that Alex Cora was gone from the Red Sox, but Carlos Beltran, the New York Mets manager that they just hired this past offseason, he's gone. We have 3 weeks until spring training, so huge fallout for a bunch of organizations besides the Astros just happened. And now we have this random Twitter account that popped up that's claiming to be Carlos Beltran's niece. And she made the bold claim that Jose Altuve, and it's funny because I listened back to last week's show, Jose Altuve, who I mentioned that I didn't want to disparage his legacy. I didn't want to implicate him if he wasn't involved. Well, he got implicated.
And he may be the worst of the offenders, in fact. So not just implicated, one of the worst.
She said that he may have been wearing a buzzer underneath his clothes that would aid him in being able to know what the pitches were, and not the 2017 season, but the most recent Astros season, the 2019 season. And you can probably only assume further games in between, not just limited to those 2 years in particular, if a player is seriously going to such length. But that really caused a storm because there's these videos that come out of Jose Altuve insisting, please don't tear off my shirt, as he hit that famous home run off of Aroldis Chapman to propel the Astros into this latest World Series. There's this kind of like weird bulge that if you like look at the right frame, you can kind of see. That one's a little bit more questionable, but it just adds up into like, I think there's a part of us that's ready to believe anything with the story now because it's just gone to a point where just more and more stuff is coming out. In fact, if you just want to go full conspiracy theorist with this, there's even thought process that this Twitter account has been really positive about a certain Justin Verlander as opposed to the rest of the team. I mean, there was already that suspicion that this didn't seem like Carlos Beltran's niece. This seemed like a player. This seemed like someone going full Kevin Durant burner account, and here we are. Initial thoughts?
Yeah, well, I want to give my initial thoughts when it comes to the niece that we're talking about and just give a little bit of background. So some of the background on this niece's account is the so-and-so, whoever the person is, has been leaking some information, right? So not only information in regards to this cheating scandal, but some of the other information in regards to the team, even before some of the MLB insiders have been able to leak it, right? So you have all of your journalists and, people on ESPN, people on, Fox Sports that have sort of insider connections into these organizations. And this random Twitter account, right, from Carlos Beltran's niece has been able to get that information before even some of those sources, right, the ESPNs, like I said, and the Fox Sports, right, the major networks. And they've been posting this stuff, a few hours to even a few days before the major story breaks. Then the other thing that makes it a little bit suspicious, a little bit weird, is the Beltran family has come out and said, hey, nobody knows who this girl is, right? So it's allegedly Carlos Beltran's niece, but the family has come out and said, like, no, we don't know. We don't have any nieces or anybody in the family of that name, right, or that's related to us. And so therefore, I think that leaves it as it's probably somebody within the organization that, is coming out and saying these things. Now, I do wonder about what the motivation is, right? Like, is the motivation, if it is Verlander, is the motivation, hey, I'm going to make myself look good and be the good guy in this situation when everybody else is sort of, the sinners and the demons amongst the organization? Or is it just somebody that like felt, that moral apprehension and was like, hey, I just don't feel good about this. I don't feel good about the cheating that's going on in this organization. And I want to do something about it without there being a bunch of backlash, right? Like, obviously it'd be like a workplace sort of ethics issue is you're not just going to go straight to your manager and say like, hey, here's the issue, right? You normally will go to an HR. This is sort of a way to stay a little bit hidden, stay under the covers, yet still be able to air your grievances.
Well, I mean, if this is, because it's just allegations, Justin Verlander per se, you don't obviously want the Astros to lose this world title or for this world title mean anything less, because from a pitcher standpoint, you weren't benefiting from this sign stealing. You were just going out there dominating, throwing the best game you could, and if your hitters managed to put up enough runs for you to win that game, that was great. And for Justin Verlander, this would have been his only world championship in his career. As we mentioned before on previous shows, he hasn't had a win in a World Series game in terms of his actual win-loss record statistically. So, a big part of like his Hall of Fame bid, which, is very important to a player, very important to a player's legacy. I kind of understand the human element of that if you were from a perspective where you didn't honestly know. But obviously our big thing on this is, how do you not know? How does any player in that locker room have not known what was going on? Because the player that outed this whole scandal was a pitcher himself, Mike Fiers, who was on that staff. And speaking of Mike Fiers, Jessica Mendoza, who is a analyst for ESPN, former softball player, does a little bit of work with the Mets and why she's in the headlines because she was brought on to talk about the Carlos Beltran firing. She needs to learn kind of like more or less about this whistleblower thing. Mike Fiers, you gotta give the guy credit for stepping out into the public. We talk about the sketchy Twitter account that's come out and it potentially being a player. Well, Mike Fiers said, screw that. I'm just going to come out there and I'm going to be honest and open to not allow this scandal to go any further, because I don't understand what Jessica was thinking. Because first off, if this wasn't brought out there to the public, this could still be going on. It could be going on for decades even. It could only be getting worse because we're talking about buzzers now. What are we going to be talking about later on? What's next in this whole thing if this doesn't get put out like it's about to? Because Rob Manfred already came down hard on the Astros. What's next for the Red Sox? If Beltran didn't get let go, would we been talking about the Mets in a couple of years, questioning their World Series? What would have been next if Mike Fiers wasn't brave enough to actually step out in the public, say what he had to say, and let that be his piece?
Yeah, and I always feel bad when people shame whistleblowers, right? Because even if, let's say, the whistleblower was incorrect, or the league was able to find that, hey, there was really no wrongdoing or anything like that, or we don't think that it was severe enough to warrant any punishment, something like that. There's a reason why we need to protect whistleblowers, and we should have their back. And it's in order to keep the integrity of the game, of the workplace, right, of the government. And, like you said, Mike Fiers, I commend him. I know that it's hard to come out, but him being able to say that, has led to us discovering just how rampant sort of this cheating is amongst the league. And, I think he should in some ways be honored for that. So I'm grateful for it. I do agree that, had we not stopped them now, right, and had the league not handed out such harsh punishments, this definitely could have been an even bigger issue.
And it's like, because she works for the Mets, it's even a bigger gray area, because it's like, okay, so you just wanted Carlos Beltran to just be fine, your manager, and who knows for this to be implemented in your game. And she's a former player too, as a softball player. So it's like, come on, this is all about sportsmanship, right? We can't allow this to continue further. There's a lot of stuff going on with this story. I mean, it's been a great story to talk about. I mean, we're talking about baseball just a few months before the season, which is more than baseball's had the luxury of being spoken about when it's not the playoffs or not the All-Star game in recent years. Obviously, we're talking about it for the wrong reasons, but there's a lot of fallout. And one of the bigger questions, too, is just going to be in regards to the players. Again, we were shocked that there was no player suspensions, that there were no player fines. Part of the issue is it's kind of tough because we mentioned baseball salaries are not equal. Do you charge them at what their rookie salaries were in that given year or at that time, or how involved they were? Do you find them based on that? And when we look back at this scandal, the MLB definitely gave immunity to some of these players for even coming up and talking to them in the investigation. Now we have questions of, okay, they were immune from the initial sign stealing scandal, but if this buzzer thing starts to take off more, do you still grant them that same immunity?
So I wouldn't, because then that's the players directly being involved, right? Even beyond just the banging of the trash can. That means that the player themselves was okay with actually strapping a device to their shoulder, right? Or wherever it might have been housed, their stomach, their hip, whatever. As far as we know, it's the shoulder. So that means they would have had to have been okay, and they would have had to have 100% knowledge, and they would have had to have consented to having this device put on their shoulder. And that to me tells me hey, you're directly involved in that cheating scandal, right? Whereas with some of the players, they might not have been the ones to directly say that, hey, we need to bang on trash cans so you could tell us what type of pitches come, right? They could have just said, hey, we'll go along with it, right? But it could have been the general manager's plan. But now they're actually being the ones to carry this out. They're the ones having something attached to their body. The other thing, though, is I don't know if all of the players knew about it, right? So Altuve basically ran off the field, right? And he was saying hey, don't rip off my shirt, don't rip off my shirt. So that to me tells me that maybe it's not every single player on the team that was a part of this half of the scandal, right? I think every player on the team probably knew about the banging banging on the trash can, just because you're going to know those things, right? And you're going to hear the manager or whoever it is banging on that trash can. Whereas Altuve saying, hey, don't rip off my shirt, don't rip off my shirt. That to me tells me there's probably a lot of guys that were like, why wouldn't you let us rip off your shirt? Like, that's what everybody does, right? Mm-hmm. So they probably didn't know about it. And if that's the case, it's a lot easier to punish the one or two players that were in the know than it is to punish everybody.
Well, he came up with two excuses in that instance. He said, one, I'm shy. Two, my wife didn't like it, like when it happened in a previous game or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. And there was an interesting video that came out recently that was kind of like more or less an anatomy of a liar. If you question someone directly, like ask them how they knew like when something was happening, because I believe the reporter had asked him like, how did he know to expect that pitch or something like that? And he like laughed it off and then brought up something unrelated, which, mm-hmm. you know, it's a pseudoscience, being able to analyze if someone's really lying in a mm-hmm. particular moment. I mean, certainly there's been trained professionals for years who have taken on that task, but it's really hard to believe anything really coming from any player at this particular instance. And it's disappointing because, again, Jose Altuve, he has been great for the game. This plucky 5'6" second baseman who was thought to be just like a bat boy at like a Astros tryout and told to go home, suddenly is one of the biggest stars in the game. And now he's just coming under fire too from not just analysts or people that are talking about it, but other players are criticizing him because Aroldis Chapman, who he hit the home run off of, tweeted at him with a picture of, you know, you've seen the Michael Jackson gif of him eating popcorn, and mm-hmm. then CC Sabathia or not CC Sabathia, I think it was either CC or David Ortiz, tweeted at him a picture of him having to walk through one of those airport security metal detectors on his way to the plate. So he's just getting dragged right now, and it really takes away from what could have potentially been a Hall of Fame legacy.